So a couple months ago, Marcus, I shot you an email, or rather a Facebook message, and said, we have this series coming up, Failing Forward. We need speakers.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, your response was, I don't think you need to reach out any further. I may be the perfect person.
I just spent the last 2 days before that writing out this blog post. I'd been going through a number of things and talking to different entrepreneurs and realizing that my story is not a whole lot different than a lot of other people's, but most people don't talk about like why they do what they do, what kind of forged the fires that make them want to be an entrepreneur and keep fighting. And I thought, well, I'll put this into a blog post and I'll post it. And after I'd done it, I realized, well, gosh, I don't want to post this and then be known as that guy that failed.
Right.
And because here I'm launching a company, right? And I don't want the attention on being, something that didn't work, and then they remember that part. So I thought, well, I'll just hold that story for a while until we launch our product and get it out there. But you had called right after I just wrote that whole thing out, and I thought, well, maybe the timing's pretty good. And it was. It turned out great.
So you've lived in a few different cities, and I think we both see the value of true community. And when you have those cheerleaders, you call them, and you have the other folks in the community that really just want to say, hey, we're beside you through the thick and through the thin. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot into what community perhaps you've seen that does this really well and endorses failure and accepts failure, and another community that didn't? And what are some of the elements of each one of those communities that you really saw and identified?
Well, I see that there's always different facets to everything, right? And what is defined as community is when you have a group of people who have common goals or common experiences and want to see everyone win. And I think what happens is when you get in those environments where everybody's kind of fighting for the same causes, everyone's believing the same beliefs, it's very easy to kind of get an idea out there, get support, and get those cheerleaders that we've been talking about. And cheerleaders defined as somebody who you can bounce something off and they don't judge you about what it is. They try and figure out how to make it a feasible thing.
Right.
And that's what I found when we moved out to San Francisco and in the Bay Area in general. You get that kind of, everyone's kind of trying to make something, in this case, the technology and the internet, but everyone's trying to make something right now, and everyone's having their own issues. So we all know we're all kind of, failing left and right. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to expose those failures so that we can learn from each other so we don't end up making the same mistakes. A lot of that goes with coding, where people are, coded something some way and it didn't work out well. How do we do it better the next time? A lot of it is like financial. I got financed from this investor. This is how we set up the terms. It didn't work out well. Hey guys, make sure you never, set up terms like this in the future. And those are kind of like those cheerleaders that you need to have around you to kind of help you make good decisions, and to, especially when you're in a situation where you do get in the doldrums and you do get bummed out and you do things, the crap hits the wall, and you don't have mom and dad there to go home to because they're clear across the country. You need to be able to call somebody up and say, hey, can we go get a beer, or can we go get some coffee, and have those talks, right? So you have to have those cheerleaders. There's been other communities I've lived in, and smaller communities, where sometimes there's a sense that we don't want somebody to succeed because that means that we're not successful, and so there becomes this competition. Right? And what ends up happening is if somebody excels and then they have a screw up, then the people that didn't want them to succeed in the first place were like, oh, see, I told you. And it becomes that kind of like a Shark Tank type of toxic environment where suddenly people are not sharing what's going on, or they're not talking about things, and because they don't want to be judged or they don't want to be labeled. And especially when you're in a very small community, that happens so easily. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I felt like I needed to be in a different environment and be in the Bay Area and kind of, be with other people who are trying to do the same thing.
So one of the things I think that is a common stereotype of the Midwest is we're very, very risk averse, right? And I think there's probably certain elements of that that are truthful. And one of the big reasons for failing forward conversations is, how do we just open up this dialogue? How do we get people to come in from the outside plus people from the inside and say, we're all broken people, and let's talk about this. Talk to us a little bit about when people start to practice that vulnerability and they start to practice that humility, it can be very nerve-wracking. And if it falls upon deaf ears, they feel probably like even more perhaps of a failure than what they did before they said that. Yeah. So walk us through a little bit, places you've been where you've practiced that vulnerability and it fell upon deaf ears. How do you overcome that so that you can walk on and continue to practice that vulnerability without worrying about if it's falling on open or deaf ears?
Biggest mistake was trying to share everything to a big group that I didn't already know. And then suddenly people who don't know you are like, you know, I can't believe that guy just said that. I would never say that, you know. When you put yourself out there for people who don't know you, don't have a personal connection with you, they don't know your kids or your wife, they don't know your circumstance, it's very hard for them to emotionally connect with you.
Yeah, that's fair.
So you always have to start with a connection. And so my recommendation is, with a community, you always want to start small and then grow it out. When you start small, you get to learn from each other what, why, meeting your son today and meeting, your wife and knowing who you are. It gives me a whole new perspective and appreciation for who Dusty is, versus if, some stranger comes in off the street and just starts blah, telling me their whole life.
That's just weird, right?
That's just weird. It's just weird. You get familiar with people. Scientists are the same way. So scientists, they get familiar with the chemicals that they're working with, and they start creating a series of failures that they know that they can control, but they do it in such a way that they intentionally make it happen because they're trying to figure out which combination is going to be right. And so, in the sense of science, you see that there's an intention of failure because you're trying to figure out what doesn't work so that you can find out what does work. Right. Everyone points to Thomas Edison and how many thousand times he used filaments until he found the perfect filament that made the light bulb. And that's probably, overly indulged, history. I don't know. Maybe it was just 4. We don't know. I have no idea how many times. Right? Yeah, it's kind of romanticized, but the principles are still the same. A scientist will try, several different angles until they find the right one that actually works. And that is how communities start. That's how friendships start. That's how relationships start. You start with what you know, you share a little bit, you see how it's received. They share a little bit, then that's received, and you grow it out from there. But to try and just say, hey, we're going to be a community and do it all at once, right. There's just no connection. And the human element of all of that is that connection. You guys started this Failing Forward Conversations. Where did that start? How did that conversation come about? And how did you get to where this is today?
So I think it started, actually I know it started between 2 general conversations that kind of merged between Dr. Linder, who's the interim director here at KANEKO, and myself. We were talking a little bit about the Midwest culture and the difference between that and other successful communities where failure is almost worn as a badge of honor on your sleeve. And we just did a little bit of comparative analysis and said our community isn't like that, and there's a lot of value to that. And so as we try to become a community that fosters creativity and a community that fosters innovation, a big element of that is being able to foster an environment of the endorsement and acceptance of failure.
And so you partnered with KANEKO? So
we partnered with KANEKO, yeah, and I feel it's a really good space for this. We didn't want this to be a chamber-driven event. We wanted it to be something that's more in the creative space, and when you think creative space in town, you obviously think of KANEKO. So it's undoubtedly a great fit for that. Even getting to know June KANEKO a little bit and talking with him. I've been a fan of June's for a long time, and talking about his perception of failure is absolutely fascinating. And so it really opened up our mind as to what's the perception of failure towards people that are known on the national scale like yourselves, locally, and as well as on the academic side. What's the psych side behind it? What's the social side? And what's the science behind all of this thing we call failure?